Hello everyone, my name is Lois and I'm here from Eats Treats Café in Philomath, Oregon. At the cafe I am one of the R&D bakers. In this video today I'll show you how to create this delicious loaf of gluten-free sourdough bread. This is the reward, it's the real deal. It's got a firm, chewy crust like you would expect from a loaf of conventional sourdough bread and a very nice artisan bread texture. By way of introduction, at the cafe, we serve up great food and serious barbecue. We do it in a very relaxed and casual atmosphere. We'd love to have you come visit us in Philomath, Oregon. Our website is eats-treats.com. We put a lot of information out there, including quite a few recipes, and the one I am doing today for the sourdough bread plus the sourdough starter you'll find out on our website. Did I tell you we are a dedicated gluten-free restaurant? That's a big plus. And we have, over the course of time, created quite a variety of mixes that we use every day at the cafe. And they are available and packaged and ready for sale, both through the cafe and through our website. And today, to make the bread, I am using the cafe all-purpose flour blend. Making sourdough bread is a 2-day process. You're going to need sourdough starter, and once you have that in the refrigerator, you take it out and refresh it the day before, let it sit out the day overnight, and then you make your bread the next day. So you just know you've got this little make-ahead process before you can make your bread. So let's take this in stages in the video. I'd like to show you how to actually make the sourdough starter yourself. And that is a little bit of time over 7 days. So you'll see me work through that progression, and then we will bake the bread. Did I tell you that not only our website, but at the cafe we carry a Facebook page that you can see our daily specials too. That was just a side thing. Anyway, to get started, let me tell you about the equipment and the ingredients you'll need. You will need a heavy stand mixer in order to mix your dough and a paddle attachment. Okay? A kitchen scale. Gluten-free baking is not a little bit of this and a little bit of that. We need a more precise measurement of our dry ingredients and our wet ingredients to get the beautiful textures and results that we want. And to that end, you're going to need a kitchen scale, particularly for this recipe, because you need to be measuring in grams. So there are lots of these on the market. They are not particularly expensive. Just get one that measures in grams. You will need a sourdough starter pot. There's lots of these available online in different sizes and shapes. Get a nice sturdy glass sourdough starter pot, tight fitting lid, and can hold about 2 to 3 cups. You will need a nice rounded bowl. It could be glass, it could be ceramic, it could be even food grade plastic. It's not going in the oven, but we are using it to shape your loaf. So this one it's a Pyrex one. It belongs to my my mixing bowls. And it's not the small one, it's not the large one, it's the medium. It is a 1.5 quart mixing bowl, okay? And as you can tell, we're gonna put our dough in it, and you want a nice rounded shape to your bowl, because obviously that's what's shaping your loaf. So you don't want a bowl that has a flat bottom. You want a nice rounded shape to whatever you purchase. You will need a 6-quart Dutch oven, because that's how we're baking our bread. And to do gluten-free sourdough at home, we are modeling a professional steam oven by baking the loaf in a Dutch oven, because the Dutch oven is going to hold the steam and create, as the loaf rises and browns, it's going to create that firm, chewy crust that we expect in a sourdough bread. So you need a 6-quart Dutch oven with lid, and make sure that your top can withstand about 450 degrees in the oven. Beyond that, really, you're just going to need some usual kitchen things like liquid measuring cups and a spoon, a spatula, a whisk, those kinds of things. So nothing out of the ordinary there. You will need a little bit of parchment paper. I'll tell you more about using that as we get to baking later on. It is helpful to have a little masking tape and a Sharpie pen, and here's why. When you get to putting your keeping track of your starter in your starter pot, it does help to just put a note on the pot that explains the day that you refreshed it and how much is in the pot, how many grams of starter you've got in the pot, and that will carry forward in terms of your memory of it. Later on, in a couple days, as you see the starter develop, I'll ask the question whether you would like to enlarge the starter to either save more of it for yourself or to give some away. And if so, you're going to want on hand some kind of an additional bottle. This is a mason jar, spaghetti sauce comes in it, that I use when I'm giving starter away to a friend. Okay. Another thing that we will use later on is a simple calculator. You'll see that in play when I get to making the starter. Okay, ingredients. We are using, in addition to the cafe all-purpose flour blend, we're using millet flour, a small amount in the bread, but we are using it to make the starter. So you will need buy about 35 ounces of millet flour. There are a number of sources for that, for gluten-free millet flour. And water, that's a big deal for us. And the trick here is that we want non-chlorinated water. And I bet you can guess why. We are building a starter which is fermenting the flour and the water based on wild yeast in our environment. And that is how we are creating the sourness and the fermentation flavors that flavor our bread. So the chlorine, if you had chlorine in the water, that has the effect of tapping down your ability to do that. There's a lot of ways to get non-chlorinated water. One, of course, is you could buy bottled spring water. You could have filtered water. You could use well water if you wish, and the other one is you could use drinkable tap water. And the way to do that would be to set it out in a bowl over a 24-hour period. Just put water in a bowl, set it out on the counter, and the chlorine will dissipate out of the water. That's one way to dechlorinate just plain old drinkable tap water. In addition, when you're making the bread, you will need psyllium husk powder. Again, there are a number of sources for it. You want to buy psyllium husk powder, not psyllium husks, okay? It is an essential ingredient. This is not an option. When you are baking gluten-free, since we do not have gluten to bind things together, we are looking for other ways to bind the doughs together so that they have the elasticity, the texture, the flexibility that we want, so that when the steam is rising our bread, it's holding it all together. And that's what psyllium husk powder is going to accomplish for us. In addition to that, we're going to need a little bit of apple cider vinegar that's in the bread. And on baking day, we will need 3 egg whites, a little bit of sugar and salt, and a tiny bit of active dry yeast. You will find in sourdough bread that when you're baking gluten-free, we will need a little bit of additional yeast in it as well. So that is it for our ingredients. So with that in mind, let's make starter and get started. Again, you're going to build it over 7 days. And when we're all done, you will end up with about 2 cups of starter in your starter pot. The starter itself is simply millet flour and water. Get out your bowl or whatever you want. I like doing this, actually. I'm going to use this for baking anyway, but It's a nice size, actually, and over the course of a couple days, I'll show you how the starter kind of matures on us. I'm putting it on my scale, I'm turning it on, I am zeroing it out, and so here we go. So here's the basic rule of thumb. I'm going to add 120 grams of millet flour. I'm going to feel like a broken record. You are going to hear me say 120 grams of millet flour for a couple days here. 120, all right. And now for the water. I'm going to zero out my kitchen scale, and now I want 128 grams of water. And that doesn't take long. Ta-da! Okay, I did it. And the only thing to do with sourdough starter is mix it up. Okay. It could be a spoon, a whisk, whatever you want to do to mix up your sourdough starter. And I'm going to clean this up just a little because I want you to be able to see as we get going over the next few days what that's going to look like. There's our starter. This is day 1 for starter. And you could cover this loosely with a kitchen towel if that makes you feel more comfortable in the kitchen. But frankly, I just leave it out on the counter, and we'll be back to it tomorrow on day 2. In the meantime, if you do not yet have our recipe, you may want to pause our video, go out to our website, to the recipe section, and grab the recipe and follow along with me. And I will see you on day 2. Okay, it is day 2 for sourdough starter. Before we get going, just some observations. Not a lot of growth in the sourdough starter yet. I see a few bubbles on the top. It still smells like flour and water. That's to be expected on day 2. And here's what we're going to do today. And the process that I'm going to follow will be the same process that you will use for days 3, 4, 5, and 6. And here it is. We're going to stir the starter. We're going to weigh it. We're going to discard half of it. And then we're going to feed the other half. And it's in that way that we do that we're building a stronger and stronger starter every day by giving the yeast new food to grow on. So to do that, I'm going to weigh the starter. So I have an empty bowl I'm putting on my scale, making sure it is set to 0. And I will go ahead and weigh my starter. And I have 211 grams of starter. So this is where my handy dandy little calculator comes in. And half of that is, let's call it 106. So back to the scale, make sure it's at 0. I'm going to put 106 back in my bowl. Okay, I overdid it there. Remember, I told you gluten-free was the exact science, huh? Okay, I've got 106 in the bowl. We're going to discard that portion, and we're feeding this portion with the same amount that we did yesterday. It's the same formula we're going to follow on the future days. So I am zeroing out my scale, and 120 grams of millet flour goes into the starter today. 20 it is. All right, I am there. And 128 grams of the non-chlorinated water. Again, zero my scale, 128. All right, we're there. And we'll stir that up. Same thing we did yesterday. All right, we're set. That goes on the counter, and we'll take a look at it at day 3. And that's it for day 2. So it's day 3 for the sourdough starter. Observations today. Did it grow in size? Is it bubbling? Does it smell fermented? Actually, I just smell a very slight fermentation smell. You can see it's a little pebbled on the surface. If I was looking at the bottom of the bowl here, I'd see a few bubbles. And if not, no worries. Just watch it each day. Sometime after day 5, you'll notice the starter has grown in size and it's bubbling along nicely. People get all worked up about whether their starter is doubling in size, and I just don't worry about it. Just stick with the recipe, keep going, and you're going to be fine. So today I'm going to do the same thing I did yesterday. On day 2, I'm going to discard half the starter. I will feed the remaining starter with 120 grams of millet flour and 128 grams of non-chlorinated water. Stir it up, leave it at room temperature today, tonight, and I'm going to follow that same process for days 4, 5, and 6. And so that's it. I'll see you tomorrow on day 4. So it's day 4 for the starter, and this is interesting. The bowl in front is the medium-sized bowl you saw on day 3. The smaller bowl behind it is another batch of starter I also have going, all the same, except I made it in a smaller bowl. Notice how different they are. The bowl in front is flat. It has some liquid on top of it. The smaller bowl rose and then looks like it deflated, and it has the pebbled-like top that we saw yesterday. You may see some little bubbles, some increase in size, some smell. If there's liquid on top, just stir it back in. Both of these are normal. If your bowl looks like the one on the left, proceed forward. If your bowl looks like the one on the right, proceed forward. Both are fine. And we're going to do the same procedure that we did yesterday. I'm going to discard half the starter and feed the other half in the bowl. And I'll see you on day 5. So hi, we're at day 5 for the sourdough starter. And let's take a look here. It's rather gloppy. There's a mild fermented smell to that. Same procedure as yesterday. We're going to discard half the starter, feed the other half in the bowl with 120 grams of millet flour and 128 grams of non-chlorinated water. That's really it for day 5, and I will see you on day 6. Today is day 6 for the starter. It is slowly growing in size. It's been bubbling along, and you are nearly finished. When you are done tomorrow, you will have about 2 cups of starter. So today is the day to ask yourself if you'd like to enlarge the starter in order to give some to a friend or to make more for yourself. If so, instead of discarding starter today, equally divide the starter among 2 bowls and feed each bowl with 120 grams of millet flour and 128 grams of water. Tomorrow, this will give you a total starter yield around 4 cups. I'm deciding today just to make starter for myself. So my process today looks like just what we did on previous days. I'll discard half the starter and I will feed the other half in the bowl. This is our last day of starter feeding, and tomorrow we will finish up the starter. See you then. So congratulations, your starter is done. The only thing to do today is to stir it up and put it in the sourdough pot, tighten it up, and refrigerate it. And you are ready to start the baking process. Out of curiosity, I weighed it this morning, and the amount of starter that we made was about 2 cups. It was 433 grams, which is great because 1 cup of starter is 213 grams. So again, about 2 cups in the pot. Over time, as you start working with your starter, the basic rule of thumb is this: you're always refreshing a cup of starter, the 213 grams, with 120 grams of millet flour, 128 grams of water. So 2 parts of starter to 1 part of millet flour, 1 part water. And remember that you are always using refreshed starter to bake bread. And that's why you're going to take the sourdough starter out of the fridge the day before baking and refresh it, and then bake the following day. The question that comes up at this time is, how long will my starter last in the refrigerator? And I have seen 2 camps, 2 schools of thought on that. One is I refresh it every 7 to 10 days. And the other is I set it and I forget it. And I tend to fall in that camp because sometimes I don't bake bread for a month or 2 at a time. And I have been fine. I have not had a problem with the starter. And of course, as you see, I've got a good tight fitting lid on this sourdough pot. That said, don't leave it forever. Starter needs to grow. And so you will want to periodically refresh it to allow it to continue to ferment and to keep it going in a nice soury sort of a way. Healthy starter maintains its ivory-ish color. It may have a little bit of liquid on top. That liquid could be clear, maybe a light gray, and that's okay. Stir it in, you're fine. However, if you are seeing moldiness, blacks, purples, black liquid on top, your starter is not any good. It's time to throw it out and build a new one. So the next step in the video is, I'll assume you have starter in the refrigerator, and we will start the bread making process. This is the morning prior to baking day. We have a few prep steps to take this morning so that we're ready to bake tomorrow. Working in the morning is not essential, but our starter does need time to refresh today, tomorrow, so that we're ready tomorrow morning. The first thing I did this morning was remove my sourdough starter from the refrigerator, and I gave it a good stir. And at this point, I am going to put 213 grams of starter in my bowl in front of me on the scale. So, getting close. Okay, and we're not discarding the rest today. We're storing it in a container. So you need a covered container, and take it all out of the starter pot and into the container. Wash the sourdough starter pot for tomorrow morning. Cover the container and refrigerate that. Okay, and I'm refreshing this as I have done before with 120 grams of millet flour and 128 grams of non-chlorinated water. Stir it up. Okay. And I just set this aside for tomorrow morning. All right, that's good to go. The other thing I'm going to do is get our dry ingredients together. And I'm just taking my mixer bowl and put it on my scale. And our dry ingredient is Eats Treats Café all-purpose flour blend. And I need 300 grams of that. Yep, there. Okay, got it. The only thing we're doing in addition to that is a very small amount of millet flour. I am adding 50 grams of millet flour. And my last ingredient, the last few, are 25 grams of the psyllium husk powder, 24 grams of sugar, 12 grams of salt. And truly all I'm doing is just giving that a mix up for tomorrow. I'm going to set it aside, and tomorrow we bake. So are you ready? Let's bake gluten-free sourdough bread this morning. I like to start early in the morning because my bread will be cool and ready to slice by mid-afternoon. So first step, let's get our starter measured and ready for our bread this morning. If you recall, we had starter that we refreshed from yesterday, and it's in our bowl. And I'm going to mix that up, and I want 213 grams. Basically, remember that's a cup of starter, and I want that for our bread today. So I have my scale on, and I'm just going to measure 213 grams. And as you can see, I've got a little bit left in the bowl. Okay, I'm going to set my starter aside. And remember that we had starter that we left in the refrigerator that we didn't refresh. So at this point, I am going to mix it in with the starter we refreshed. I'm going to mix it all up and put it back in my starter pot. Okay. Okay. Not a hard step, but really just taking care of business. All right. Now I am curious to find out how much starter I have left over. I've got the starter pot on my scale, and I have zeroed it out. And I want to take a weight of this because this will be handy for me to know the next time I bake. So let's see what I got. I have, looks like I have about 377 grams of starter. I think I'm going to want that. And at this point, I can close this up and refrigerate my starter. Before I do like to put a little note on my jar to let me know how much starter I have. So I'm just going to write down my my 300 some odd grams. I put that on my sourdough pot, and that's ready to refrigerate. All right. Okay. So now we have all of our ingredients ready to mix the bread, and it's time to do that. So remember, we had our dry mix from yesterday. Okay. And now let's talk about the wet ingredients. Just before I started the video, I warmed up 328 grams of water, and I already added 6 grams of active dry yeast and 1 teaspoon of sugar. And the sugar I added just to give the yeast something to grow on. This is where it is really handy to have an instant read thermometer. They come in all shapes and sizes and price ranges, but it did allow me to determine that my warm water was between 105 and 115 degrees, and that's warm for baking. That's the warm range. So that's what, and this will come in handy later on in baking because it'll help us take the temperature of the bread to know that we're done. Okay. So into the mixer bowl, I've got the warm water, the yeast. Notice that it's a little foamy on top. Even if it's just a little skiff of foam, that's okay. And that's ready to go in. Okay. Sourdough starter. Here's my 213 grams, goes in. All right, 3 egg whites. And I need 12 grams of apple cider vinegar. So I'm going to just put my bowl all the way on the starter and just measure my 12 grams straight into the mixing bowl. All right, we're there. One more drop. Okay, all right, that's it. Okay. I'm going to give this a stir so that my liquids are partially mixed in so it doesn't make a mess when I turn the mixer on low. Okay. That's going on the mixer. Paddle attachment. Okay. I'm going to mix on low briefly to get everything combined, and then I can stir around the sides and then mix it on medium for 5 minutes. So back in 5 minutes. Okay, the mixer is done. And while it was mixing, I did these things in the time that I had. I cut a piece of parchment paper to fit the inside of my bottom and sides of my Dutch oven. About 14 inches works. And I folded it in quarters. I trimmed the edges. We'll be using that in the Dutch oven. I set aside a small tray. That will become more evident as we go as to what I'm going to use that tray for. It doesn't have to be a little tray. It could be a small cutting board. I'm going to set aside some of the all-purpose gluten-free flour blend to use later. And I'm also got myself a half a cup of uncooked rice. That's not going in the recipe, but I do need it in the bottom of the Dutch oven, and I'm going to put that in to provide an insulating layer, and then we'll set the bread on top of that. And that's kind of one of these neat tricks because it will prevent over browning on the bottom of the bread. Okay. I also got the bowl out that I'm going to shape my dough in, my cannonball loaf. And remember, this is the 1.5 quart mixing bowl with a nice rounded bottom. Okay, I generously greased and floured it, and that's ready to go. And at that point, I can, oh, look at this dough. It's really cool. I can put the dough in the bowl. And there it goes. I am just going to lightly even this out on the surface. Okay. You know, and if you want, particularly if this is the first time you have ever done this recipe, you can take a picture of the dough at this point so that you know what your starting point was. And now, I'm going to clean that up a bit. I'm going to lightly cover the bowl, plastic wrap, bowl cover, and we're going to set this aside and we're going to let it rise. And we're going to leave the bowl cover on, and we're going to let it rise for 45 minutes. And we'll take the cover off, because at that point, at the 45 minutes, I would say that the dough will be just coming up to the bowl, the top of the bowl. Okay, so at that point, take the cover off. And our goal then, and you may need an additional 30 minutes or so, this is going to depend on kitchen temperature for you. I want the dough to be in the center. I want it slightly above the top of the bowl. This is not going to be volumes of bread. I want it just slightly raised. So cover goes on, and I'm going to check it and let the dough do its thing. So after rising 75 minutes, the center of the dough will be slightly higher than the top of the bowl. The dough will be puffier, springy to the touch. When it's just poked lightly, it will no longer be smelling heavily of raw flour and fermentation. It will be less tacky. At this point, we're going to put the Dutch oven in the oven. We're preheating 450 degrees for 30 minutes, and the bowl with the dough is going in the freezer for 25 minutes. And now for the really fun part. The Dutch oven has been preheating. I took the bowl with the dough, I just took it out of the freezer. It's been in the freezer for 25 minutes. I'm going to dust the top lightly with gluten-free flour blend. Okay. Here's where I take my parchment paper and I'm centering it on the top of the dough. And my tray, I'm inverting the tray on top, or whatever flat surface you're choosing to use, because this is allowing us to turn it upside down. And now we get to take the bowl off. Voila! we have a cannonball loaf of dough. And at this point, I'm going to put a little bit more gluten-free flour on top because I like the look. And I'm going to put a little bit around the edges, okay? And using my cupped hands, I often will bring the loaf in just a little bit to make it a little bit rounder and higher. Not much, okay? That's looking so good. Okay, the Dutch oven comes out of the oven. It's been preheating at 450 degrees for 30 minutes. So remember, it is very hot, okay? And the lid comes off. And here's where I'm using that ½ cup of uncooked rice. This goes in the bottom of the Dutch oven, and it's providing an insulating layer between the bottom of the Dutch oven and the dough. I get to pick up the dough by the parchment paper. Remember, it's hot. The oven is hot. And center it in the Dutch oven, okay? With a sharp knife, I am making 2 slashes, not very deep, no more than a ½ inch, at the top of the dough. Okay. And then 90 degrees to that. So in other words, on the top of the dough, I kind of made a crosshatch like that, okay? All right, I am ready to put the top on and put it back in the oven. And it's when I put the lid on that it will create the steam around it to create the firm, chewy crust, okay? So once the lid is on, it's going in the oven. We're gonna bake 30 minutes. So I did tell you there are many steps to this recipe, right? Okay, so at this point, it has been 30 minutes of baking, and the only thing we are doing at this point is taking the lid off. Oh, and now I get to see my first look at the loaf. We've moved from dough to loaf. We're not done yet, but we get to see how beautiful it's going to be. So our step at this point is to take the lid off and leave the lid off. The Dutch oven goes back in the oven, reduce the heat to 375 degrees, and bake it 10 more minutes. Okay, one quick step here. I took the Dutch oven out of the oven, and all I am going to do is remove the parchment paper. But do remember that your Dutch oven is hot. So that comes out, and that leaves the loaf directly on the rice in the pot, and it's going to bake for 10 more minutes. Okay, it's time to test the bread to see if it is done. And your first step is to take the Dutch oven out of the oven and put it on top of the stove. To check the loaf for doneness, the bottom will have a hollow sound when you kind of thump it with your fingers, and the internal temperature will be somewhere in the range of 209 to 211 degrees. If it is not done, bake it about 6 more minutes. If you do not have an instant read thermometer and you're not super sure whether your loaf is done, I don't think you're going to hurt a lot if you bake it 6 more minutes or something like that. So what we're going to do is give it a test and see how we're doing. And kind of thumping nicely. We're going to put the temp in, and we've got it. Our loaf is done. When the loaf is done, turn your oven off and leave the oven door closed, okay? Leave your loaf in the Dutch oven and let it sit on top of the oven for 30 minutes. This is the beginning. This is just the beginning of the cooling process. So it's sitting here, it's going to rest for 30 minutes, back in 30 minutes. Finally, last step in the cooling process takes place in the oven with the oven turned off. If you cut into homemade gluten-free bread when it's still warm, it's going to be gummy. You need to let the bread thoroughly cool to room temperature so that the flours and starches have time to firm up to create the texture that you want in your bread. So what we're going to do is this. We remove the loaf from the Dutch oven, and we are simply going to place it directly on the rack in the oven. We're going to leave the oven door ajar and let the oven and the loaf cool to room temperature. I find that the cannonball loaf, when I cut it, I get 9 great thick slices and 2 ends. And if I cut those 9 slices in half, I get 18 servings. This is delicious bread, slathered with butter or served with extra virgin olive oil. And the slices do freeze well for later enjoyment or toasting. As a reminder, to do the gluten-free sourdough bread today, we use the Eats Treats Café gluten-free all-purpose flour blend. And that's available along with all of our other mixes at Eats Treats Café in Philomath, Oregon, or through our website. I really enjoyed making this bread. Thanks for watching.